Hello, family members. Hope you're having a nice day today. Kimmy and I are here because I need to unload some information on you, and hopefully it'll be useful to you. So, I want to give you a little background on this. Kind of follow me here. So, I fell asleep at a stupid early hour last night, like before 7 o'clock at night. And then I woke up at 1 in the morning and I had this frantic thought oh, I should make sure I have toilet paper and stuff on hand because, prices could go up on that kind of stuff. And then after I make this big order of all sorts of different pantry stuff, dog treats, pads, toilet paper, just all sorts of things. Anything I could think of that is going to be long-term useful. I just went ahead and I'm going to need it eventually anyway. I'm just not going to wait to buy it. I'm going to buy it now. Because who knows, in a week, maybe that stuff will be more expensive. Okay. So then, remind you, this is gotten to be maybe about 2 in the morning by this point. Then I start messaging people. First it's my close friends, and then it's people that I kind of know. And then I just sort of see who's awake, and then just start sending random messages to people I haven't talked to in a long time. Hey, you probably ought to stock up on non-perishables, now, And so then I was like, well, I guess I should make a video about this, right? Let all of my viewers know about this thought. Well, about that time, about the time that I got to that point, I did a little research and I was like, okay, I can film this video. It's 3, 4 in the morning and I kind of run out of steam. I'll go back to sleep. And I told myself at the time, I'm like, well, either way, this is going to make a good story, or either I'm going to make this video under these weird circumstances, or I can tell about how I almost made this video under these weird circumstances. But instead, I didn't. I fell asleep, and then I woke up and did some more research, and then I made this video. So, all right. All that to say that, I'm not an economist. I don't know anything necessarily special or whatever about all this, but I've done some reading, and using both what I've read and sort of logical conclusions, this is what I've come up with. I was listening to, I believe it was on PBS NewsHour, an economist saying that, prices on perishable items could be, the first to go up because, you can only really hold those in a warehouse for maybe 8 days or something like that. Whereas perishable items, whatnot, can take longer. And so that was the initial thing that got me started thinking this. I was like, well, if say, tariff started a couple of days ago, so about a week from now, we start seeing a spike on grocery prices, I think it's reasonable to think that people will start panic buying just their everyday essentials, sort of like COVID and toilet paper, right? And so that was my initial thought, was well, it's probably a good time to go ahead and stock up on, those non-perishable standard items that you're always going to need. Because if there does end up being a run on it, then you don't have to worry about it, And if there isn't a run, no big deal. You'll use them up eventually anyway. But then I started doing more research on things. And it's very interesting because if you look at the major news sources and they talk about like prices, what they'll talk about a lot are like larger purchases, like cars, electronics, laptops, things like that. And I get why, a high level tariff on some of those items would make those items that much more costly. But I mean, we're talking about like an economy-wide phenomenon that may or may not last for months and months. This isn't something that it's just about like a major purchase. And then I also heard some economists be like, oh, if you don't need it, don't buy it. Don't worry about it, And I'm thinking that is probably an attempt to try to avoid any sort of like panic buying, because I've seen other economists say the exact opposite. And so I'm like, people are going to be getting a lot of mixed messages on this. But here's what I'm thinking. So when it comes to pantry items, things that you're wanting to buy on a regular basis, and you may be stocked up now, but you might not have enough for a month or whatever, go ahead and buy a month or two's worth, okay? With most items that are tariff sensitive, we'll say, they will eventually kind of like level out. There'll be a place where it starts to kind of like normalize. So if you realize that the price spike has already started, you're too late. Don't worry about stocking up now. Wait for prices to normalize. Now, that's for things like coffee and tea and things like that. The prices on that's likely to go up, but we'll still probably have a reasonably decent supply. It'll just cost more. One thing that I've seen is that with certain types of produce, particularly fruit, vegetables are sensitive to this too. Apparently broccoli and cauliflower especially, but we produce more of our vegetables domestically than we do of our fruit, which makes sense because fruit is a little bit more temperature sensitive and climate sensitive, whereas like vegetables have been sort of bred to be able to grow all sorts of different places. So one thing that it looks like is going to be maybe really hard to get our hands on at all is going to be like bananas and broccoli and nuts. Nuts are going to be, especially like they were saying, what was it? It was cashews, and I believe, I can't remember what other nuts were. I'm not going to say because I don't remember. I'll try to link some sources though. Olive oil, we tend to get from overseas. And that's something you certainly could buy ahead of time and stock up on to a certain degree, right? But yeah, that's the main thing is like, if you were going to buy it anyway, eventually, but you weren't necessarily going to buy it right now, then you might want to do that. And even if it is something that is more habitually produced domestically, the thing that I think a lot of people are not talking about is that packaging, raw materials, a lot of this stuff we get from overseas. We get a lot of the bags and boxes and bowls that hold the stuff that we need, you know. A lot of even domestically produced products are going to be using items that come from overseas, and so are going to be, you know, tariff sensitive, which is frustrating, right? Like, I know my platform is not big enough that I don't have any real concern that I'm going to cause panic buying. But if for some reason this video were to go viral and you're hearing this and more than a few thousand people have seen it, you're probably better off just to wait for tip prices to normalize, okay? It's not gonna necessarily be a forever thing, but there's, I think, gonna be certain, especially produce items, that we're just gonna have to not take for granted anymore. That, thank you, Casey. Sometimes you have to stop your YouTube video so you can take your dog out. It just happens. He's old. Old men can't always hold it. But, so this getting ahead of the game thing only works if you're actually sincerely ahead of the game. So if you're not, don't worry about that. I think we're gonna see a lot of people be surprised how much of, say the domestic beer and wine they drink is dependent on bottles and bottling equipment that comes from overseas. Like, even that stuff is going to be very sensitive to going up during, price spikes. And here's the other thing. It's not always going to be logical. It's not always going to be based on any sort of sound rationality. We know that, manufacturers love hiking prices and any excuse to hike prices. And even after whatever the reason was that they had to hike prices is no longer relevant, they'll keep that price. So it's going to be a little bit hard to tell sometimes what is a genuine price hike out of, like, actual factual, that's what it costs now, versus, another manufacturer putting the screws to the consumer, trying to squeeze a little bit more money out of us, right? So I in my video 2 videos ago, so yeah, maybe I am getting a little bit like a conspiracy theorist about all this stuff. I said that I talked about whether or not we were all ready for another Great Depression. And perhaps I was being a little hyperbolic, but perhaps not, And the fact of the matter is, a lot of the things I said in that video, I still stick to. I think it's probably a good idea for people to know how to produce some of their own stuff in their own yard. If you have a yard. I mean, if you don't have a yard, you can still do like a little hydroponic garden if you have a good sunny window or whatever. That was one of the things that I read this morning that I was like, oh yeah, that's going to be a big deal. Spices, a lot of our spices we get from, international suppliers. And so spices, especially things like, I would say like turmeric and, like various things like that that you get, saffron from overseas, you know, like that kind of stuff is going to maybe be a little hard to come by. But there's a lot of herbs that are easy to grow, like in just a little flower garden out front or in an hydroponic herb garden in your windowsill, So that might be something you want to get now before it's harder to get things, any sort of things, because of tariffs, Like the little terracotta pots or whatever that the herb window garden would come with. Maybe that's going to go up in price, Like every little component of a product could potentially be contributing to a price hike, like a collective price hike. And that's kind of a problem, If I were a coffee drinker, if I were a tea drinker, I would be getting a lot of coffee and tea right now, Like, I mean, I'm sure you'll be able to get certain kinds of like herbal teas or whatever from, local suppliers, domestic suppliers, but a lot of our tea comes from Asia. And a lot of our coffee comes from like Africa, and it's processed in like Europe, We're a little bit better off because Canada and Mexico are in this latest round, because we get a lot of, especially produce, from Mexico. But, I mean, who's to say there won't be another round, Just because it's working one way right now does not mean that's how it's going to work for months to go ahead, We got to, like, realize this is the long haul. And I find it really funny how much market instability is the, like, financial storyline here, an economic storyline here, because most Americans don't have like that much involvement with the stock market. They may have like a retirement plan or whatever, but that's not a big deal for most people. But the price of coffee, that's a big deal for almost every single household in America. I mean, only seasonally here, because I don't drink coffee, but my dad does. But yeah, it's a big deal, and I think we have to keep an eye on that. I think it's kind of interesting how legacy corporate funded media is spending all of this time telling us that the Dow Jones is down 14% in 2 days, which is actually extremely terrifying, because that could actually trigger the Great Depression, or at least a global economic crisis. But this tariff stuff is quite possibly going to cause more pain more quickly to more Americans than what's going on with the stock market is. And I find it somewhat interesting that is the lead story, is this like amazing drop in the stock prices of blah, blah, blah. Not the, hey, a week from now, it could be very impossible for you to get like, fruits and vegetables. And so maybe you might want to think about what that means for you particularly, You know, if you're the kind of person that cans or freezes produce, this might be a good time to be getting produce, you know? But that's not what you're going to see on the news. You're going to see a segment where somebody's going to tell you, if you don't need it right now, don't worry about it, don't buy it. And I think that message is not meant to inform viewers. I think it is meant to manage consumer expectations. And so I think that it's pretty gross, honestly. You know, it's something that is presented as sincere advice. And I don't think it is all that sincere. I think that if the person who was in that segment, that economist, she knows. She knows. So why would she tell you otherwise? You know? I don't know. I do think that does go a little bit into conspiracy theory territory. And, you know, I did want to try to avoid that for the most part. But again, I have not slept in a very normal way at all. My brain is somewhat boiled. So take it all with a grain of salt. I will try to have as much of resources as I can linked in the description so that you can double check my work, since obviously, again, not an economist. But, you know, I remember what 2020 was like. And I remember how quick and easy panic buying can cause massive unavailability of very important items. And I'd rather everyone who watches this video have all of those important things they need, their medicines, you know, not necessarily prescription medications, because that's not really something that you can get in advance so much, but like OTC things, you know, like your Tums and Tylenol and antibiotic ointment and things like that. That's the kind of things that I think that you should just have enough of it on hand so that if there does end up being panic buying and you can't get it when you need it, you already had it. Yeah. All right, family members, I'll let you go. Casey is, I don't know, Casey is whining, so he must need something, but I just took him out, so I don't know what it is. This is what happens when you have a dog that's almost 15 years old. He gets a little like, I need, but I don't know what it is, and you have to kind of figure it out for him. Anyway. Take care of yourselves, family members. I'll talk to you later.